This week, we get to start with the third part of our trilogy, the first being looking at seasons in our life, the second, recognizing patterns, and the third is that we get to adjust the patterns in our relationship and talk about that. So join us. I look forward to seeing you. Rachel was in her mid-30s and she had 2 young kids, and she stopped bringing up her concerns about Alex's, her husband's, increasing drinking that she saw. Because in the past, her talks didn't go that well. And then Alex, on the other hand, he didn't bring up Rachel's weight gain of 50 pounds. When he suggested it, Rachel would cry and feel unloved. She was already exhausted, and that felt like another to-do. And he loved Rachel. And Rachel loved Alex, but they had adopted some silent agreements. And those silent agreements either help us or don't help us, and most of them don't help us. And that's why I'm really encouraging us to make actual agreements and have a relationship plan and to change our dance. So in all relationships, we have agreements. And unfortunately, most of them are silent. Today, we're going to focus on romantic relationships. And if you're single, this episode is for you as well, because if you understand this beforehand and you know what you need to do a dance in a way that feels great to you, then that's even better. So I'm going to be honest with you to start off. You cannot work with someone who isn't going to work with you. You know, God says about marriage and about people being equally yoked. And that means, like, it was referring to a yoke that goes over 2 ox. And, you know, in order to be equally yoked, you can't have one ox smaller or one ox dragging. They have to go equally, which is very different than how some people interpret the Bible as far as like submission and all of that. But that's not looking at what God is saying in truth. He wants us equally yoked. That means we're both working together towards a goal. So with that said, if you are having a huge power and control dynamic that is dangerous, please talk to somebody, a specialist with domestic abuse, or call your domestic abuse hotline. So in my previous marriage, talk about silent agreements that were one-sided. This is how it went. The agreement went, my responsibility was to, make his mom's cooking and don't change the recipe. Keep the house perfectly clean. Don't leave pencils or anything out, even with 4 kids. Not bring up any conflict because that would be resulting in ignoring. Don't feel bad about not being touched because that wasn't really his thing. And it went on and on and on, and they were things that actually really hurt me. But there was such an imbalance of power and, having equal respect about, hey, your thoughts and feelings are important to me, that wasn't going to work out. And that's okay, because it's different for most people. Most partners are actually more willing than you think. Many men really want to please their wives, and they don't know how in a lot of ways. They don't understand. They're not understanding things clearly. Men's brains work a little differently than women's brains. And so that creates a problem. And I think a lot of men are more willing than we realize. And that's why it's so important to talk about this, because you can be having a pattern that is not serving you. And we just had a 3-part series. We first talked about seasons, and we talked about patterns in our relationships. And today we're talking about changing the dance or creating a relationship plan, which perfectly lines up with our guest next week, who is Susan Scott. And she wrote the book, Fierce Conversation and Fierce Love. And it's a powerful book, really great interview. You guys are going to love it. One thing she says is the importance of having clear, concise, honest, and brave conversations. And if you're like me, I tend to be overly kind, and that means I've had to learn to be clear, concise, honest, brave, and approach it in a way that actually serves me and my partner, Mike. So we're going to talk about intentionally creating a relationship plan. Whenever anyone goes into business, they have a business plan. But when you go into relationships, we don't have that. We have a lot of assumptions based on how we were raised, or maybe we have a few other assumptions, but a lot of it comes from our love blueprint, and it's usually been unexamined. But that doesn't serve us. And the key part is if one person is hurting, then both of us are hurting. We are a team. It isn't just about me, it's about we, and we have to each individually be healthy. So what is a relationship plan? Well, Mike and I, my husband, literally have something in our phones called our relationship plan. And I've talked about this before, but it goes into the parameters for our relationship. And I feel like, it's kind of like if you've ever been bowling and, you see you can have the kitty guardrails on the side so you can make sure that you hit the pins. I feel like that's what a relationship plan, because you don't want a gutter ball. You don't want it to go in the gutter. You actually want to hit the pins to actually have this relationship be serving you, be a team. So what are some things that are in a relationship plan? Well, I think the first and most important thing is, how are we going to disagree? Because everyone disagrees and everyone has differences of opinion. If you don't, that's not being honest. That's not an honest relationship, because we're all our own unique little creatures. So how are we going to disagree in a way that serves us both? We have to have conflict resolution plan. And that's going to look different for everyone. For Mike and I, we've definitely put some parameters on that. For neither of us, yelling does not work. And I would say for the majority of people, yelling doesn't work, or, getting too intense. In fact, if there is any of that where there's an intensity go up, the other person can say, hey, let's just come back to this. Let's come back to this later. I can see this is not a good time that serves us, and we'll talk about it later. We have lots of things when it comes to conflict. Like for Mike, he prefers really doing our conflict resolution on Wednesday morning, our reading morning. For me, I actually, if there's something bothering him or something that I did, or 90% of conflict is misunderstandings. If he sees something, I'd like him to bring it up right away, because that serves me better. Like I prefer that. I also like the silent treatment does not work for me. And yet we both need time to think about things, especially Mike. And so, if he does need the space, he just says, hey, I'd like to really think about this. And then he can take, hours or a day, but not really more than a day. And he always says, I love you, and let's just take a day and talk about this later. And that's not stonewalling. That's like, hey, I need some space to talk about this, and I'm going to come back to that. Because otherwise, wow, it's very triggering to me because of the abuse situation I was in to be stonewalled, because that was the form of abuse I had. For Mike, it's very triggering to have like verbal abuse, which I don't verbally abuse, which is great. But we did make sure that was in the plan. Also, not bringing up the past and being like, well, this and this and this, and you always or you never, things like that doesn't work. Another thing as far as conflict resolution is we never do digs. Oh, you're just like your dad, or just a dig, because we know the most sensitive parts of each other. Like, that's the key about a relationship. And we never bring up things to intentionally hurt each other, because that is just plain mean. And so we have all of that in our how we're going to resolve conflict. A couple other parts is, yes, we are a team. Another thing that we have, and this is key, is we assume the best about our partner, because it's very easy to be like, oh my goodness, and he did this, and that means he doesn't love me, or that means he's lazy. It's very easy to create negative stories, because that's what our brain naturally does. I don't know, it thinks it's keeping us safe by doing that. And they're usually not true, and they usually don't serve us. So we start with the assumption that we assume the best, and we assume the best intentions. And we start off with that way, and that we love each other and we are a team. So those are parameters. Then the other part of that is, how do we be good roommates? Because there's relationship challenges and there are roommate challenges, like who takes out the trash, who does the grocery shopping, who cooks the meals, how do we clean, who cleans what. Those are all roommate things that need to be discussed openly, because there's so many challenges, even with like, oh, he didn't take out the trash and what that means to me and this and that. And, maybe you're feeling already burdened, and then that you add that to it. And it's easy to create a story. So just having roommate agreements that work for both of you. Have it clear and concise in your phone or on paper, something like that. And then a big one, and I've actually become more aware of this recently, is who's carrying the emotional load. This is a biggie, and I actually didn't really understand that till more recently. Especially as women, we tend to carry the emotional load for the family. And what that means is like, okay, who has what appointments, who schedules the doctor appointments, who plans the vacations, who does this, who plans the meals, who makes sure Johnny has his soccer pants, who makes sure that Ariel has her ballet slippers, all of these things. And that is a huge emotional load that many men are not even aware of even exists. And they automatically just are letting the wives do it. And we automatically are allowing ourselves because we train people how to treat us. And so if we're allowing it, they're like, sure, why not? So that's super important. So yeah, who is carrying the emotional load? And then how can you delegate that and, all of that? Another biggie is, how do we feel loved? This can go into love languages. Do you tend to feel loved by words of encouragement, gifts, physical touch, acts of service? I'm trying to remember the fifth one. But there's different ways that you can feel love. And it's important for your partner to know what makes you feel loved, and vice versa. And it's not just those things. It's really like, for example, gifts. Oh, great. You got a sleeping bag. Woohoo. That's a gift he's so excited to give you. By the way, my dad actually gave my mom a sleeping bag for their anniversary one time. It was not a happy anniversary for my mom. And for the right person, that would be amazing. The whole point of a gift is they have to really know what you want, which means you have to verbalize it, or they have to study you, or a combination. So it really has to be like the nuances within that and getting to know each other and how each other works. For example, I didn't even realize for me that physical touch was that important. And after living in a marriage for, previous challenging marriage for 22 years where I was not getting physically touched, except on Sundays, I would have him he would put his hand on my back and put his hand on my arm. That was kind of the gist of the physical touch that I got. And that I felt like physically touch deprived. It felt horrible. And, even though it brought up that wasn't going to work. But knowing that this is how a person feels loved is really important. Another thing that I think a lot of us may not realize, and I probably didn't realize, is I don't feel like, how do you feel connected? And we know from things I've talked about before that connection, emotional connections comes from one person being vulnerable and the other person hearing, receiving, comforting. And that's what creates connection. And that's really talked about in the book, How We Love. And so for me, I do not feel connected to Mike unless he tells me something that's going on the inside of him. Like if he goes past 3 days, I start to feel disconnected from him. Now, Mike, on the other hand, he probably could go 7 days or longer. But for me, I actually need to know what's going on internally to feel close to him. And so that's just like, how do we connect? I really like doing things together. So it doesn't work for me to have my things and his things and just that, where that could work for some couples. For me, I'm happy if he has his things and I have my things. As long as we have our together things, that's super important to me. To have together things we enjoy and we can laugh and be goofy. We love to camp. We love to hike. We like to go for walks, things like that. And we like to cook together. So there's a number of things we like to do. I'm offering some free pages of the Unravel Notebook to help support you along the journey and to correlate with this week's episode. So look for the link and enjoy. And so really, how do you feel loved? How do you give and receive love? That's huge. What is sex going to be like? Woohoo! Frequency. How does the person get turned on? We all get turned on differently. What feels good? Gosh, I don't even think I knew what felt good. And I did not have a willing participant in my previous marriage about this. Like, we'd never talk about the S word. And it's super important to know how each of us work. And everyone has like a different frequency. And how are we going to work with that? And do we involve toys? What is all that? And making sure that it works for both of us. That's super important. And that sex isn't just transactional because you're married, but is because of intimacy. And that's a big thing, because I'll tell you, if a woman is exhausted, thinking about the kids all the time, doing all the emotional labor, doing this and that, as women, it's much harder for us to get into sex if that's our state. And so, making, as a man, they need to understand that all of that matters. So, so it's not just this transactional thing, and it shouldn't be just transactional. Another big thing. Ooh, I'm talking about all the juicy stuff. What involves financial discussions? Because, like, is it a $500 limit? Is it a $200 limit? What, do we have our own credit cards? Do we have it together? Are we going to do a budget? Really having a goal financially, and not just financially, I think a goal as a team. Like, what is our value goal? Like, what is our goal in life is huge when it comes to relationships. Like, Mike and I love God, love Jesus, and love others. And it's really important for us to want to serve others. And we both have what's in our heart to do that. And that is our goals, our vision. So having a vision and putting together, like, this is our vision, this is what our goals are, huge, because you can't get anywhere if you don't know where you're going. So having a vision. Another vision is Mike and I really want to be an example of what's possible to have a really great marriage. Like, to really delight and be like, we're like best friends. And we want to be an example of that, because Mike and I didn't have those examples. And it's very difficult. Like, we've been trying to build this, but we haven't had those examples. So, we use books, we listen to ourselves, we listen to how our bodies are responding, we're being honest. And so we want to be an example of what that looks like to our kids, to the people we know. We want to inspire people in that way. And, that we're being honest to ourselves and growing ourselves and connecting with each other. So Mike and I had a relationship, speaking of Mike and I, we had a relationship splat. So we are always adding and changing things in our relationship plan. And that's something we also include, is that this is not permanent. This is up for negotiations, but we negotiate it together. And I think that's huge, because we change and we evolve, and we have to work with that. And it's part of our dancing. I think of our relationship like dancing, and our relationship splat was basically, my niece passed away. And I thought Mike and I were dancing together. And as I splatted, I realized we were dancing about 3 feet apart. And I just, and then I noticed that, like, as I'm trying to recover, it actually was not super helpful to have Mike close to me, because we were so far apart. And it really was because I was being honest about the surface obvious things, but there were things that I knew about that I was not talking about, and things that had shown up regularly in my barf notebook that I was not talking about, and it didn't serve us. And so in the end, what we added is, if it shows up in my barf notebook, and again, that, the barf notebook or the barf plan comes from my book, The Unravel Notebook, and it's what I practice. It's basically the process of emotional regulation in my journaling, but it's basically a series of barf out my emotions as is, with all the cussing, whatever I need, barf it out, sort it out, and I'm sorting it out. I'm looking for patterns. I'm asking myself, what is on my side of the street, what's not, and then plan it out. So the challenge is I knew about this stuff, and I wasn't putting it into action, because I had a belief that, Mike had gone through a lot of shifts and changes, and that, I shouldn't bring it up. So basically I was silencing myself, which that's been a pattern in my life that I'm growing out of, and it didn't serve us. So we were very separated, and I had to kind of recover from that, and he had to recover and grow. The cool thing is we are a team, and as we talked about it, he received things very well, and we are working on our dance together, and it's just going really well, because we are a team. We assume the best, and we added some more as far as the level of honesty. Mike also added some things, because he had a thought still lingering that it was not dangerous with me, but that expressing true thoughts and feelings does not lead to connection. So, but the truth is, expressing real thoughts and feelings frees up energy and increases more connection. And so he still had something like, well, if you love somebody, you let them do what they want, even if you feel that tinge. That doesn't work. So he had to change that. I had to change mine. And then we had to create some new parts of our relationship plan, which means a lot of listening to ourselves more. So this is all about changing the dance. So there's a dance going, there's a relationship plan, and it's way better to start making it into something acknowledged by both, and that you're doing it together so that it feels good and you're both showing up authentically and dancing together. So if you want to know more about this, you can go to another book that's probably one of my favorites is The Boundary Boss by Terry Cole. And she was a guest on episode 48. And I think understanding the concept of boundaries is super important. So as we wrap this up, I want you to just know that we don't need to procrastinate. There is hard now, or there's harder later. All the things you fear now, if you don't bring it up, will definitely happen if you don't. And it's the truth that will set you free. One conversation, one arrangement, one agreement, one dance pattern at a time. So I just want to end with just taking a deep breath in and breathe out. One more deep breath in and breathe out. I want you to think of a relational dance pattern that does not feel good to you, that's not serving you. I want you to take that to the barf notebook process and process your side of the street and process how you want to have that conversation and start to bring up those honest conversations one at a time. And I'll see you next week. Live brighter 1% a day. I believe in you.
Stay tuned for our next episode.